guys today. Shannon Gabor is founder and CEO of Clever Creative. She's the driving entrepreneurial force behind a premier woman-owned and operated brand strategy and creative agency based in Los Angeles. Cut from the cloth of a fine artist, but wired with a sharp business mind, Shannon graduated from USC with a degree in fine arts and a minor in communications. She built her early career working in fast-paced entertainment promotions for giants like Burger King, 7-Eleven, before spending 5 years at the Mattel brand, leading global packaging and design and worldwide licensing for major franchise properties, including the Barbie product line. She draws from strategic marketing, and Shannon left the corporate security of Mattel at age 28 to transform a scrappy backyard office into a highly respected, award-winning indie powerhouse. Today, Clever Creative specializes in people-first branding and serves as a vital strategic partner to world-class brands like Netflix, Warner Brothers, Starbucks, and Tastemade. Shannon, thanks for coming on. Appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. What a wonderful introduction. Wow.
Yeah, let's
I feel
go.
like I've actually done a pretty good job in my career so far.
Hey, well, just getting started, as they say. All right. Well, I gave kind of an in-depth bio there, but maybe you can contextualize it for us a little bit. So where'd you grow up? What got you over to become a Trojan, and what'd you study in school, and how'd you get into the industry?
I love that. Yeah. So I was born and raised, I like to say I was bridge and tunnel. So I was born in New York City, but raised in northern New Jersey. So parents are both from back east. That's where my roots are. And I was really always, I always liken myself kind of born with a crayon in my hand. I've always loved the creative field, color, living my life with color and creativity and art. So I think that was always kind of in my bones and in my DNA. So grew up on the East Coast, decided, I think it was my art teacher in high school was like, you're drawing your family crest and there's a lot of oceans, 57 Chevys, and palm trees, which don't exist here in northern New Jersey. So maybe you're manifesting where you should be for 4 years in college. So I wound up coming west and studied at USC, as you mentioned. Definitely always found myself in the fine art realm. At the time, USC actually didn't have a Roski School of Design, so it was a more traditional program, but that's where I majored as a BFA designer with a minor in communications. But once I landed at SC, I started to realize about my second year, blue hair, wearing my Dickies coveralls, going from the ceramics lab on my skateboard, I found myself taking a lot of classes at the School of Business. And I think that's where I started to recognize like my total sense of wanting to connect the dots between business and creativity. And I don't think I was clairvoyant at that ripe age of 19, 20 years old, but maybe that was kind of the starting point of me coming into my own and realizing that I wanted to find that kind of a semblance of how can a creative live in business? I didn't have traditional role models in my growing up in and around advertising or marketing. So I wasn't really exposed to that, which we all know is if you don't have that exposure, you don't really know what's possible. So I studied, USC, got my degree in fine arts with a minor in Annenberg communications, took a handful of business classes, stuck out like a sore thumb in those business classes, but I really was curious. And I think curiosity has been a really big part of where I am today and how I got here. Wound up interning for a couple different ad agencies while I was there, just finding them on my own. Got to work in the binocular building of Ogilvy back in Venice in the day, and just started to absorb. And my parents always said, be a sponge. My mom is Latina and she's extremely fiery. And she always believed as an immigrant, like you go off and you just try and you'll find your own. And if you fail forward, that's okay too. So wound up doing some internships, which kind of gave me kind of my early understanding of what is an agency, what do these players do within the bullpen? What are they all like kind of adding towards? What are they adding to? What are pitch teams look like? And then when I graduated, I had taken an internship at a promotional agency here in Los Angeles. And that gave me, I think that's where I kind of cut my creative teeth, so to speak, in understanding what promotions and IP and entertainment look like within the context of working on the Burger King account there. So I started working in QSR and I started designing poly bags and all the little pieces that go into a kids meal program from a graphic designer standpoint. And that really was my entrance into an agency, being a promotional agency. And I think that gave me a lot of visibility into the function of where I could see myself as a creative, and learning from really smart people and staying late nights. Those were like the early days of the ways the agencies used to look like in real life,
Mhm.
IRL. But I learned so much. And then after there, my boss decided that she was going to a small toy company called Mattel and that she felt there was a space for me there as a packaging designer. And that's where my love
Wow.
for packaging design kind of came full circle. And she took me with her, luckily. And I had a wonderful mentor in her and a great boss. So I wound up spending 4 years at that promotional agency. And then I went to the other side of the creative coin and went brand side and got into corporate design or corporate brand, working on Barbie and other girl properties at Mattel as a packaging designer.
I love it. That's awesome. That's an awesome story.
Yeah.
So, you talked about kind of, cutting your teeth originally in the promotional side. It's so important for brands like QSR and a lot of others. I mean, if you think about Barbie, like Barbie, the last movie was probably one of the standout partnerships, campaigns of maybe all time, but definitely of the last,
Yeah.
modern memory. Like felt
Yeah.
like everywhere you went,
Yep.
big fashion brands and every type. You would go to New York and there would be an entire Zara store that was in
Hmm.
transformed pink, and every single item inside of the store would be pink. What do you think is kind of the key ingredients for a successful brand partnership when a brand is looking to step into a global house powerhouse IP like a Barbie, and how do they operationalize that and make it successful?
Yeah, I think what's really important in a partnership with kind of an IP like that, that phenomenon took on such great success. But I think it really focused on a bigger marketing lesson, which was that particular instance. Barbie stopped acting like a toy brand and started acting like a cultural brand. And so I think what we're seeing today is oftentimes partnerships can look transactional. And I think we know that that doesn't really work, right? I think the modern customer, consumer, fan sees that you put a logo on a product or you do a co promotion and you run an ad. That's not really the era in which we're in, right? So I think partnerships need to be a true extension of a story and really embark on a conversation and allow that conversation to kind of organically happen, because we know that right now the cultural fluidity of what's happening in conversation with brands and partnerships, sometimes the best moments are not scripted. Like we don't know they're going to happen, I mean, we can see that in so many different ways. Sometimes we're seeing it on platforms like Coachella with Bieber and Rhodes. Like those moments of a self identity that he brought to us on that stage was not something any of us were expecting, right? So I think massive cultural relevance is really important to think about in a partnership. But I also think when we're working with brands too at Clever, we're always thinking the brand who maybe has a little bit more, like more followers, more fan base, or might see themselves as, we're so grateful that this brand is going to partner with us. Sometimes you got to flip it and say, okay, what do we add to that conversation with that brand? Because oftentimes it has to feel equal, right? Because I think that's when a partnership is so successful, when you can see yourself partnering with the right fan base or growing a new audience and finding like the magic in each of those two brands and how they're going to work synergistically together, and recognizing that we're both showing up to this show together and we're both going to land and it's going to be successful for each of our individual success and collective success. So I think giving yourself permission to participate and showing your value, but knowing your own true additive value, I think is really important too.
Very cool. Anything else worth noting before we get up to starting your agency?
No, I think what I'm noticing too, I had written a post lately just about what I'm seeing in successful modern marketing right now with brands. And I think the world's a sticky place. And I think we're all trying to belong. So I think what I love about the world that I get to touch every day through our clients or even through connecting with people within my network or talking to new generation designers who I want to help step into their career, I do a lot of that mentorship, is like, I think at the end of the day, everyone just wants to feel a sense of belonging. And so if a brand is marketing or advertising to us, or a partnership is coming to life together, I think you always want to be able to see yourself in that brand or in their world in a way that feels genuine and true and not transactional. And I think that's where I'm seeing a lot of smart brands live right now. And kind of the perfectly imperfect way to look at life, I think, is a really smart strategy right now, whether you're in CPG, wellness, beauty, etc. I think that people are really trying to want the marketing to start to feel like I belong in the brand.
Yeah, that's cool. Are you a fan of those collaborations that don't always seem natural? Like I remember Taco Bell
Yeah.
a couple of years ago, like they did a collaboration with a hotel in Palm Springs around Coachella and like built out their own hotel and their own,
Yeah.
like what would it look like for Taco Bell to be a hospitality brand? And they kind of are a hospitality brand if you think about it.
Yeah.
QSR is in some ways hospitality driven, but are you a fan of those kind of non-natural or non-obvious partnerships and collabs?
I am. I think because we're also very indie, at Clever. So I'm a fan of unexpected partnerships. I think some of the best collaborations can come from places that people don't expect. I think the key is that if you are going to do it, don't do it for the sake of just buzz or press. Like, do it for the sake of true connection, not necessarily between the brands, but maybe between the experience you're creating for the consumer. So I would say, yeah, I'm a fan.
Yeah, I like that. Sometimes, like you said, it's the non-obvious
Yeah.
insight that, okay, like at face value, this partnership maybe looks, a little bizarre, or they're just doing kind of a kitschy, exclusive drop, for the sake of press. But then when you look a little bit deeper, it's like, no, like they have, similar ways they see the world, their audience overlap, but give exposure to new potential customers. And, at second glance, maybe it's more obvious than people think.
Yeah, and sometimes too, Dylan, there's like a pillar of a brand that maybe we know it because we're behind the scenes in the marketing or the building of like a brand's foundation, but like Crocs and Pringles. It's like, really?
Mm.
But like there's a playfulness, right, to Crocs. It makes you smile. Like whether you think they're stylish or they're fugly. Like at the end of the day, there's something kind of playful and joyful about those two brands. And so again, unexpected, but also kind of puts you on the map for a conversation, So I think there's things like that are less obvious, but that could also be aligned with maybe a core pillar of your brand that could be a shared pillar in totally two different industries with two different consumers and two different product types. So I think it's kind of fun.
Let's go. All right. So bring us up to current. What got you excited about the idea of starting your own agency? What was that process like? Women owned is a great moniker to have, but if you look at the total procurement of Fortune 1000, I think it's still less than 1% are owned by women. I think, I'm kind of I point out that statistic as often as I can, having been the chief revenue officer of an agency that was owned by a woman for 9 years and kind of learning a little bit more about that. But what got you excited about launching your own agency?
Yeah, I think for me, I always like to say that it gave me freedom. I think there is a true sense of freedom to build. I've always been a natural born leader, but I'm also something that fires me up every morning when I get to go to work, even when things are harder or stickier or crunchier. What excites me is the freedom to build the kind of company, culture, and relationships and work that I truly believe in. I think that is sometimes underestimated because we all know being a founder is not easy, being an entrepreneur. And I self-funded this company still to this day. We're privately owned. We don't have any PCVE backing. It was the last 2 paychecks of Mattel. That's what got me. So I think, going through 2008, 2020, and what I call a bit of a swirl in 2025, I think owning your company sometimes is a pretty hard place to be, but you got to look at what it is that it gives you back. And I think what Clever has always given me back is a true sense of freedom to be myself, to really think about the team dynamics, and to be curious, thoughtful, and very self-aware of who we choose to work with and what brands we feel are going to really value what we bring to the table. And so for me, it's always been about being a builder, loving an idea, falling in love with a problem, and really turning it to something real, a brand, a business, an opportunity, a new product. So starting Clever gave me the chance to do that every day, and I'm really grateful for it.
That's amazing. A great roster that I've named off: Netflix, Warner Brothers, Starbucks, and Tastemade. You talked about being selective. What are the criteria in which you evaluate opportunities to
Yeah.
work with clients, or how have you been able to assemble a roster of such cool, entertainment and consumer brands like the ones we read off?
Yeah, I think it's really easy, and some listeners might be able to relate to this. When you start something, I think it's really easy early on to take every opportunity you can. But
Hmm.
as you grow, you start to realize in your own way the ethos of what you recognize the best work happens, right? For us at Clever, that best work happens when. And I ask my team that and my account leaders all the time. Like, if we say yes to this dress, that's what I use. I use that.
I like that.
But if we say yes to the dress, what is it going to feel like? Is this client aligning on our values? Do they truly trust the process? Do they understand the investment they're making and why this investment is worth the dollars? I am not in a business to convince a client that they should invest in brand, whether it's the thinking side of the brand, building the foundation, or the doing side of the creative translation. So I think really for us at Clever, I think my kind of like ideal client radar comes through on alignment of values, the ambition of the project. Like, is it going to stretch us? Is it going to make us think and wonder? And are these people I want to work with? Like, I think at the end of the day, that's where your selectiveness can come into play. And not everyone has that opportunity to be that selective all the time. And we don't either. There are moments in the reality of running a business this long. You say yes to the dress, and it's not necessarily aligning on all of their ideal client pillars. But I think good people, a willingness to partner is super critical for Clever. A client who's open to thinking, being able to stretch a little bit and go into the uncomfortable with us if we have to. And then I think someone who's just really, really interested in building something, a desire to build something and solve the problem together is really important.
You mentioned in school kind of being the artist that was spending time in the business classes. At Mattel and within your agency roles, you often were sitting on creative disciplines like design. How much was it a stretch for you to kind of put on the entrepreneurial hat of building a company where you're selling, you're thinking about hiring, you're thinking about team dynamics, you're thinking about a lot of these more managerial driven tendencies versus the creative side of your brain? Was that a hard light to switch on, or did it come naturally to you?
Yeah, that's a really great question, actually. That's why you do this, don't you? I think, Dylan, it's interesting. I do feel like we're interesting creatures, right? As designers, we're trained to observe, ask questions, solve problems. Sometimes we're given some constraints as creatives and designers, right? And we have to think about the experience we're creating for people. And I often see that list of things that I think are part of a designer's kind of toolbox. And if you think about it, a lot of those things are actually very aligned with the same muscles an entrepreneur has to focus on each day. And I think fine arts taught me the ability to see, and I think design taught me how to solve, and I think entrepreneurship taught me how to build. So when I look back, I really do trust my toolbox. It may not be the traditional toolbox of how someone who has gotten into this more commercial advertising and marketing design field, but I think I was prepared, kind of looking at my trajectory of my studying and what I studied and all my experiences. So yeah, I think nothing really equips you fully for being an entrepreneur because there are so many forces outside of what you might be defining and building for your company. But I think that, yeah, I think at the end of the day, I always try to look at sales through the creative lens. I'm very untraditional when I'm looking at business funnels and pipelines and networking. And I don't know, I do things a little bit my way and avant-garde, but sometimes it's through the creative lens. And maybe that's refreshing for people when you are looking to kind of scale and grow new accounts. But yeah, design to entrepreneurship for me, I humbly say this, it was surprisingly natural. But I think
Yes.
I was always wired left, right brain all the time.
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of management study around the idea of design thinking, right? You
Mhm.
know, the innovators like Jobs and others who really
Yeah.
design and and product design and product led
Mhm.
marketing. You know, being kind of the key factor. Like if you can make a product that's really amazing, it in many ways can market itself. So I think design thinking is kind of permeating a lot of
Yeah.
different aspects of the management sphere these days. I wanted to ask you, you know, you grew up in New York and New Jersey, but then, you know, have been out in Los Angeles, you know, since. New York has a very specific pace, you know, you can take 5 meetings in a day, go to breakfast, run around town, you know,
Yeah.
go to an event every night.
Yeah.
And then in California, sometimes it's hard to get people to drive east or west of the 405,
Yeah.
depending on what neighborhood they live in.
Yeah.
What do you think is the biggest difference between kind of the New York pace and, you
Mm.
know, agencies that are
Yeah.
based out in Los Angeles and our association with the entertainment industry and Hollywood Beach and, you know, or Silicon Beach and all of the, you know, kind of the fact that, you know, entertainment and culture kind of starts here in LA and moves outward around the world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I have a lot of friends who I love dearly who run shops on the East Coast. So I gotta be careful on this one. I think,
I'm
but
not making not making
yeah,
a qualitative
yeah, yeah,
comparison
yeah.
versus
No.
that there's definitely a difference.
No, I think there totally is definite. I would plus one on that one for sure. I think, I think there for me personally, I always look at like the East Coast gave me a hustle. I think California gave me perspective. There's something that happens when you're slowing down just a few, like just slower. And we do that all the time on the 405, right? It's like I tell my East Coast friends, I'm like, are you okay? Like we'll talk at night and I'll be on the freeway on 405 and they're like, how are you? I'm like, I'm going 6 miles and it says about 53 minutes. So want to pace that way. And they're like, wait, 6 miles is 53 minutes. I was like, real time. So I think like sometimes I have a lot more time on my hands in my car. But yeah, I think that East Coast hustle is beautiful. It's vibrant. It's necessary. It I think drives a different level of success at different times. Having those packed in meetings. I was on the phone with someone at Netflix yesterday and she was in the car, go in a taxi, like doing 3 different things, talking to me, getting to a doctor's appointment. Like that's, and I'm like, I closed my eyes for a minute. I was like, is this really what's happening in your car? She's like, yes. I'm like, okay. And again, like maybe my commute looks different. I have more time on my hands to think. But I think that perspective for me in California, I think somewhere between the two, though, is how I've tried to kind of build my own career. But I do think there's a difference. I think there's a fundamental difference in the vibe. I think on the East Coast, there is something that I do miss, which is like you're always moving, you're walking, you're looking, there's people everywhere around you. And yes, there's people everywhere in Los Angeles, but sometimes it's in our cars. We're more insular. So I do feel like when I get to the East Coast to see some family, I have a lot of family and friends back there. I really just take in the fact that I can be like walking through the busy streets and absorbing color and sound and texture and typography and vibe and energy. And that kind of inspires me. I wish I had a little bit more of that here in LA. Yeah, I think they're definitely very much different, but yeah, I love looking at work coming out of New York versus LA too. I think there is a total different vibe that happens. Um, yeah, but there's a lot of transplants on both sides. I feel like a lot of people
Yeah,
here and a lot of people land here. Yeah.
yeah, a lot of New Yorkers who would never consider moving back and
Yeah.
vice versa, right? It's
100%.
we
Yes,
all kind of find our pace.
totally.
Yeah, I did a double red eye to New York
Oh
for
my
the first
God.
time the other day. Red eye out, red eye back, just to go to a conference, and you know it was during kind of like Nick's craziness, and I
Oh
ended up
yeah.
down at Penn
Yeah.
Station. I was just like, this is
Oh
wild. Like the city
my.
is so great. I
It's
love the
addictive
energy.
though. Like that
Yeah,
energy is addictive. I don't think I could sustain it for very long,
yeah,
but there
yeah.
is an
Well,
appreciation and a joy for enjoying it while I'm there. Yeah.
totally. About 5 days is all I can
Yeah,
take.
there
But
you go. That's your cap. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. All
yeah.
right. So I love this story that came up in my research. So early in Clever's creative journey, you accidentally added an extra zero to a project budget pitch, and it gave you a massive lesson in self worth and pricing. You know, especially with pressures around AI kind of creeping into all aspects of the business, clients expecting, more for less. And then, there's this idea just in the research, female for whatever reason, in job negotiations and asking for salaries and things like that, struggle with asking for raises. How do you break that pattern of indie agency value, or just what was the lesson learned of, the idea? Like I remember a story, a friend of mine transitioned from the music industry where he used to manage social profiles for bands for $5,000 a month. He turned in a proposal to a brand for the first time. The client called him up and said the exact same thing. Said, your proposal is wrong. Oh no, what's wrong with it? It's too small. Add a zero.
Wow.
And they ended up winning the business. And he kind of came to that same realization that you did. But what have you learned around pricing and maintaining your value and your worth?
Yeah, that's great. No, I love this topic. Oftentimes people ask me, even over the years, people always ask, like, what's the hardest part about running an agency? And I said, it's never gotten any easier to scope, honestly. Like, you're always going to wonder, right? If the value is worth X, is the recipient's perception of that. And as a woman, I think many of us are taught to be grateful just for the opportunity. And I think entrepreneurship has taught me to also recognize the value I bring to it. And I think I didn't need to become more valuable. I think I just needed to become better at recognizing the value that was already there. And I think fundamentally that's really hard sometimes, right? Because you just get a little imposter syndrome, or you just wonder and worry, is that going to be perceived as too expensive, right? But at the end of the day, like, we all know all those stories about Nike logos and what someone was, compensated for something that went on to become something behemoth and beyond the expectation. And I think what's really important is just to really eventually learn that the proof is already there, and that, you have the ability to charge more. You have an experienced and vetted, successful business. You've proven that through the work that you've created, and you just have to sit in that kind of sturdy confidence. And it's not easy. I still second guess myself. Our head of account services second guesses herself sometimes. But I think at the end of the day, that goes back to the question about the ideal client, right? If we Clever sit in confidence, knowing that what we're being asked to do costs this, because that's going to add great value to the success and trajectory of that business, brand, or product, then that recipient has to also respectfully understand that that's what it costs to get this done. And if you nickel and dime, we all know the triangle, things are going to fall off kilter, and you're not going to get the best value, or you're not going to get everything the way you want it. So, you have to be discerning. You have to be confident. I don't think it's easy. I don't think there's a one size fits all answer for how to solve it. But I do think I try to kind of keep that Post-it nearby that reminds me that this is not just opportunity. I shouldn't be grateful for the chance. It teaches me that I'm recognizing that I actually deserve that value. My team deserves that value. I have amazing talent that I pay top notch for, and they deserve to be compensated for their talents, their magic, their genius. And yeah, with AI, it's hard these days, but we have to kind of stick our ground and be fair, but also recognize that what we're making is original and human and real, and it's going to make a deep impact on a business.
Very cool. On the personnel side, you've also explicitly stating a policy of hiring around character and core values over sometimes books, resumes, or portfolios. When you're scaling an agency that relies heavily on creative output, what does that vetting process actually look like in hiring, and what are you looking for today in the this generation coming up into new teams?
Yeah, I've always hired the person. I know that's kind of a redundant phrase that we hear elsewhere, right? Oftentimes, like, hire the person, not the paper. I've always, Dylan, like, hired someone who I feel is hungry and curious and aligned with our values at Clever, more than someone who's technically perfect. but maybe difficult to work with or doesn't have the same chemistry. And I think when, we are a tiny and mighty team. And so we're 12 employees and we've always been between like 12 and 20. I've always kept Clever that size because it's been manageable in our values, our way of working. And we feel like that concierge size allows us to take care of our clients the way that we feel is like high touch and very bespoke, which is part of the Clever experience. And I think when we're looking at people, yeah, I'm very much looking at like character and how you show up and how you treat others, and even the communication, the early communication of how you're, answering an email and you're thoughtful about your approach. I think you can teach process in any company or any agency, but you can teach tools, but I think it's much harder to teach integrity. Yeah, it's hard to teach curiosity. It's hard to teach kind of, a hustle and hard work ethic. You said something about like who's coming, like who's the next generation kind of coming into this space.
Yeah, well, I think with AI pressure and the elimination of entry level jobs, we currently have a recent college graduating class with 25% unemployment, and as there's pressure to replace what we would consider kind of the grunt work jobs of agency life with AI and things that increase productivity, I wonder, are you looking for new things on the resume or things in people's backgrounds that maybe you weren't looking at, say, a year or two ago when AI wasn't adding to the productivity bottom line as much as in prior times, like where there were clear training paths to get to, entry level to the next rung in the ladder, et cetera.
Yeah, I think our position on AI, we're actually writing a statement because I feel like we haven't actually stated it on like what our position is at Clever, and I think every agency should really think about that today. I know it's not the question you're asking, but
no, I like it.
I do think it's important. I think we all have a position, right? And I think we all have heard a lot of people say the same thing. It's a tool. And in the 70s, when art directors at one of the biggest agencies were asked to use a computer, they were like, what? And I've heard some really amazing veterans in the ad space talk about that disruption, like that moment of disruption. And I don't think any of us today would think that a computer was a big disruption, but to their work, it was, right? The way that they were creating creative and original ideas in the advertising world back in the 70s. So obviously it's a tool. I think in terms of what I'm looking for today in a resume that might have been different 5 years ago is I'm less interested in someone who can simply execute a process. I think what I have to find in a human is someone who's interested, who can think, who can adapt and leverage the tools efficiently and effectively and use them for just that, like how to work smarter, but not how to replace something. And I think that, for me, AI is a tool I use every day. There's places I use it, but there's places that it's prohibitive in my own world. And that where it's prohibitive is I also think that AI doesn't have taste. I don't think it's learning as we think it is. I don't think AI in not having taste, it can't look at those nuances of great design or a great original idea. But I do think having someone who is not just a great designer and creative and maker, so to speak, I think it's required these days you also have someone who's equally a strategic thinker. And I do think the art of communication is critical. Being able to still present and articulate your ideas. Clients I'm seeing, regardless of AI and them wanting to do things for the cheap or faster, I still have not seen it yet, at least on our world. We have not seen a client not appreciate a well articulated presentation of creative thinking. Like they're still wanting that. They still want their agency partners and the teams for their brand and their account to be able to articulate, pull the strategy point down, connect it to why you're showing this idea. How is this logo actually bringing to life our value positioning statement? Like they still want that. And I think that's not necessarily as replaceable with using AI. So.
Yeah, very much. You talked about freedom being the ultimate, currency that an entrepreneur gets. I think to some degree I agree with you. Kind of, I don't really look for work-life balance as much as I look for like work-life integration these
Mm,
days.
yeah.
And I do feel like I am working harder as an entrepreneur than I've ever had to work before. But you've also talked a little bit about this idea of like an internal productivity clock. The idea that creativity doesn't just exist between the hours of 9 to 5.
Mhm.
It doesn't always happen at a desk or in a conference room putting sticky notes on the windows. It might happen when you're walking down the street with your dog, or walking on the beach, or in the shower, or whatever. In this kind of push for return to office and
Mm,
logistical chaos of when one designer might have their productive moments at 6 in the morning, and another copywriter doesn't hit their groove until 4 o'clock at night.
yeah.
How do you manage that internal productivity clock, and meeting creatives where they are, and
Yeah.
allowing them to be flexible and have freedom in their creative process?
Yeah, I've always believed, I think the mistake in measuring creative people is solely by hours spent at a desk.
Mm.
I mean, what matters is contribution, collaboration, quality outcomes, great design, great thinking, wow, wonderful ideas and moments. And I've always tried to create an environment where at Clever, people can have room to think. My room to think, my best hours. I tell my team all the time, please do not put a brainstorm or workshop or immersion discovery session on my calendar at 4 o'clock. I'm done by 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock doesn't mean I can't do admin work from 3 to 6, 3 to 7. Like, that's fine. Email checks, responsive, LinkedIn engagement, all good. But if you're asking me to come up with like a big idea, like my creative zone and magic is like AM. It's like not the PM spectrum. Versus like my creative director right now, she is like a night owl. So like her best ideas will kind of like come at like to 9 p.m. And like, which is great for her, which is my reminder as a leader of balance. Like you said, I'm like, go do the morning hike, the extra morning hike with your dog at Runyon till 10 or 11, because that's not your best time of creative thinking. Like, get your juices flowing so that 9 p.m., if you have an idea, I don't feel like you're working these crazy hours, you know? So I think I don't know. I think people you got to give them room to think. You got to you got to give people room to create, and you have to give people room to be human. I mean, that the freedom and responsibility is an adulting thing. And hopefully you have people on your team who know how to adult. And that might be times where they just need to sign off for a few hours and pop back on. And I think it comes from also building a culture of trust. And I've always done that. We are fully remote right now at Clever since January, which we'd never have been a fully remote agency. We were hybrid the past about 2 years. So it's an adjustment for me, to be honest, like to be working in, chief networking clubhouses or my home like I am now, or sometimes I work at friends' offices, but it is like an adjustment for us for sure. But I think in my belief of always knowing that creativity can't happen on demand, I think that's just the way of a creative. We just, we're always professional. We're always like knowing what we have to accomplish, but sometimes the idea just doesn't happen at a certain time on the clock. And you have to understand that that's how creatives are. That's who we are. You can't schedule inspiration.
Very cool. You brought up Chief. I'm interviewing their CMO coming up soon. I've always been
China.
fascinated with how fast they kind of popped up and grew and kind of exploded on the scene. How important are organizations that give space for female entrepreneurs, female executives to support each other, have a safe space or a collaborative space in these larger markets, cultural moments in the marketing calendar, like a
Mhm.
Cannes or a CES or a Possible? Be curious, how you became aware of Chief and what got you excited about joining, and what's your experience been?
Yeah. I've been in chief for I think almost 4 years now.
Wow.
And I had heard of it. I think someone had recommended at the time. The way their membership worked is you had to be nominated. So I believe someone within my circle of networking and peers nominated me. And then I got curious. I learned a little bit about it. I really appreciated kind of the positioning of what it was looking to do in terms of like seasoned C-suite executives, being in the circle amongst others. I think there is always importance to build community. I think sometimes it's easier when leadership has similar life experience. And I
Mm,
think at that time in my career, I always value like multi-generational community organizations. But I think about 5 years ago, right when we got out of COVID, I was struggling to find seasoned executives who knew more than me, or individuals who had gone through a similar length of career span as I had. And I just wanted to lean in on them a little bit more. And I knew that their advice and their wisdom would be very valuable to me. And so that's why I joined. I really felt like I was a little confused and nervous about how to keep Clever alive after COVID. And I think that was my impetus for joining Chief. And it did not fail me. It really brought me into incredible programming. It gave me a core group of women, which is part of their structure. And you are assigned a group that's very, very personal, meaning like it could be maybe as large as 10, but usually smaller. And that becomes your cohort. And those women are your lifeline and they're your inner circle. And I felt I was very fortunate to land in a great core group. And we're still really tight. And we know each other personally and through children, through work, through life, through struggles. And I think that leadership can be really lonely. And that's not gender specific. I think in general, like leadership can be lonely. So being in community reminds you that you're not alone. And some of the most valuable conversations I've had are on that C-suite level, because that's where I am in my career. But 20 years from now, 20 years ago, that wouldn't have served me. So I kind of love what Chief has done in terms of really being thoughtful about their membership curation, and really understanding how to build programming around where us women are, and really think about that as an honest way to help us navigate kind of the world at large right now, which is sticky and complicated.
awesome. Well, love that endorsement, and gets me
Yeah.
even more excited about my upcoming interviews. So
Yeah.
thanks for the perspective there.
Yeah.
You also alluded earlier in the conversation to your Latina mother, your Guatemalan roots.
Yes.
Outside of branding, you're a passionate home cook, and you draw deep creative inspiration from spending time with your mom in the kitchen.
Yes.
How does sensory art, having hobbies like cooking, how does that help you as a creative to kind of have creative outputs or creative expressions that aren't necessarily
Yeah.
doing something that you get paid for every day,
Yeah.
to
Totally.
allow you to have time and space to kind of be creative in another modality.
Yeah, I mean, the kitchen is one of my favorite creative studios, is what I've always said. It's just a place where I can put on some music, I can be barefoot, I can be exploring and adventures of like new ingredients. It's To me, it's an extension of curiosity, but in kind of a low stakes environment because it's like there's no scope.
Running dinner, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's like, I mean, maybe the family starves that night, maybe, but like, at the end of the day, like it's low stakes, right? It's like I can kind of, I don't know, I can try something really different and not feel like it might go off the rails and kind of be a detriment to something. But I think for me, cooking has always been because of my mom. She lives on the East Coast, so I don't get to spend as much time with her, and she suffers from Alzheimer's. So right now, where
Mm.
she's at in her life is very different than it was when I was younger. I still try to bring her in the kitchen when I'm home and we make some empanadas or something. But yeah, I mean, food has always been love, and love is a big part of my life. And the kitchen has always been the hearth of a home. It's always been the loudest place in the homes that I've lived in, because there's always been music and pass me that and sound and sizzling. And you close your eyes and it's just all the senses minus your sight just become bolder and brighter and more vibrant. And for me, it's just about experimenting and just trusting your gut in the kitchen. Like I don't follow recipes. Sometimes I do, but for the most part, I don't, or I adapt things and get kind of like, I don't know, have
Yeah,
fun.
they're
Um,
guidelines, not rules to follow.
yeah, yeah, and I love entertaining because I love people. I love chatting, as you probably could imagine. Chat. I love learning about people, so we have a lot of family dinners with neighbors and friends, and even clients. And my kids are now older, so their friends come through. So for me, like yeah, food, cooking, kitchen, life all feel like a really joyous and delicious part of like my world.
Very cool.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about, your work in mentorship. You sit on boards for AIGA and Step Up Women's Network. Why is it important, do you think, to be involved in some of these organizations? You talked about Chief kind of having those vertical relationships, and then these other organizations that allow you to have kind of a mentor down to a mentee relationship. Why do you think that those are important? And do you think that art schools and design schools today could learn from those models more?
Yeah, I think I've definitely throughout my career have served on boards, some nonprofit, like you mentioned, some organizations that are more national level. Fingers crossed, hopefully I will join one soon for my alum. But I think like for me, it's always been a way to kind of pay forward what others have given me. And I earlier was sharing about my first boss who really saw something in me, mentored me at my first agency gig. I was a fish out of water, Dylan. I knew nothing about agencies. I was a fine arts student. Like I literally was like, what? But I think when you find a human who's willing to see something in you and know that it's really just about investing in that person and giving them critical feedback. And there's such a gift in critical feedback. I think our culture is so against feedback and like
Mm.
intentional feedback. And I'm reading the book Unconventional Hospitality right now, which is the
Oh,
genuine,
yeah, that's on
yeah,
my list.
of 11 Madison Park. And I'm not going to even try to be as articulate and beautiful in the words as he is, as Will is in the book. But there's a part of the chapter toward the end of the book that talks about like tough love and like being able to give tough love. And sometimes people use sarcasm, but he's like, that's not the best way to give tough love. People have to realize when you give critical feedback, it's really that's showing you're invested in that person's growth. And so I think when I'm mentorship for me is similar to that. Like I want to be invested in the next generation of people coming out of school who are trying to navigate a really hard market. And I think it really is about good karma and paying it forward. I didn't get here by nobody taking 15 minutes to help me answer a question as an entrepreneur. My success is 100 million% connected to so many thousands of humans that were giving me 15 minutes when I honestly didn't know how to do something. And I think, yeah, you got to open a door, you got to lend a hand. And mentorship for me has always given someone that possibility that they didn't see for themselves. And I think that's a beautiful thing in life to be able to give. It's a gift. It really is.
I love it. Well, Shannon, really appreciated getting to spend some time learning about your career and all the cool things that you're doing these days. If folks want to connect with you at the agency or follow along with your thinking, your thought leadership, where would you like to send people to stay in touch?
Yeah, please work through the LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is a great place for me. It's my favorite social platform. It might sound nerdy. My 7-year-old daughter thinks that's really lame of an answer. But yeah, I would say LinkedIn. Every person I connect with, I truly make it a part to know them. So if you are going to connect, send me a note on like how you kind of came across my name. And let's kind of continue to evolve and emerge and build bigger circles for us all to learn from each other and become wiser.
I love it. Well, thanks again for spending some time with our audience today. If you are watching the show for the first time, don't forget to give us a follow or a subscribe if you want to hear other amazing thought leadership from our amazing creative community. And if you're listening to the show, an honest review on whatever podcast platform you might be listening on is how we find a larger audience organically. So please do that. And if there's a designer out there, maybe a creative, a client who you think would be interested in hearing the conversation that I had with Shannon today, or just somebody who you think would get value from tuning into the show, don't forget to share. And with that, I will wish you a great day. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Dylan, for everything.